I want a man people notice immediately, my girlfriend said during a party while ignoring me for someone wealthier across the room. I finished my drink and left early. Nearly a year later, she arrived somewhere important and realized everyone was waiting for me. I want a man people notice immediately. Melissa said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. I didn't answer. Instead, I set my drink down on the nearest table. I looked at her across the room, really looked at her. And that's when I realized she wasn't talking about some abstract standard she held for herself. She was talking about me, and I was standing right there. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, said good night to no one in particular, and walked out into the cold November air. I thought I was just leaving a party early. Months later, I'd realize I had changed all of our lives. I lost the version of myself that believed love meant showing up quietly. I believed that being steady was enough. I trusted that Melissa saw what I was building, even if no one else did. What I didn't know was that this moment, this sentence she tossed out like it cost her nothing, wasn't the beginning of our unraveling. It was already the end. I just hadn't read the final page yet. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 31. We'd been together 3 years. Melissa worked in marketing at a mid-sized agency in Midtown. I ran a small but growing financial consulting firm out of a shared office space in the Flatiron district. We lived together in a one-bedroom in Murray Hill. That's all you need to know. The party was at Calvin's apartment on the Upper West Side. Calvin was the kind of guy who seemed to know everyone and owed nobody. A hedge fund analyst with a laugh that filled rooms, and the kind of effortless presence that made strangers feel like old friends. He and I had met through a mutual client 2 years prior, and somewhere between late-night strategy calls and shared frustration over a deal that nearly collapsed, we'd become real friends. The kind who showed up. Melissa had always liked Calvin fine, but she liked his world more. The apartment was full that night. Architects, lawyers, finance people, a couple of startup founders who kept dropping numbers into sentences the way some people drop names. I was near the kitchen talking to Tristan, Calvin's college roommate, a quiet but sharp litigation attorney, when I noticed Melissa drifting. Not physically, not at first. She was still in the room, but her attention had shifted across it toward a man I didn't recognize. Late 30s. Expensive suit. The kind of watch you don't buy, you inherit or you earn in a way that gets written about. His name, I'd learn later, was Reed. Reed Calloway. New money made to look like old money. He worked in private equity, had recently closed a deal that apparently got a mention in the Journal, and he moved through that room like he was used to being watched. Melissa noticed him the way you notice a fire across a dark street. I noticed her noticing him. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. I should have paid more attention. "You've been quiet tonight," Tristan said, handing me a fresh drink. "Just listening," I said. He gave me a look, the kind lawyers give when they don't believe you but choose not to push. "How's the firm?" "Growing," I said. "Slower than I'd like, but cleaner than most." That was true. I'd spent the last 18 months restructuring my client base, letting go of 3 accounts that were profitable but ethically gray, and replacing them with 2 that required more work but let me sleep at night. It wasn't the kind of move that made headlines. It was the kind that made a foundation. Tristan nodded like he understood. He did. Across the room, I heard Melissa laugh. It was a specific laugh, the one she used when she was performing enjoyment rather than feeling it. I knew the difference. I just hadn't thought to ask myself why she was performing it. I found her about 40 minutes later near the windows overlooking the park. She was with Reed and 2 other people I didn't know, holding her wine glass in that particular way she held it when she felt sophisticated, stem between the fingers, wrists slightly tilted. I came to stand beside her. She didn't look at me. "And the Montauk house is really more of a fall property," Reed was saying. "Summer belongs in the Hamptons." One of the women nodded enthusiastically. I smiled because it seemed polite. Melissa introduced me eventually, briefly, the way you introduce a piece of furniture. "And this is," a small pause, "he does consulting." Not my name. Not what I actually did. Not the firm I'd built. Just consulting. Like a placeholder. Reed shook my hand with the confidence of a man who'd already categorized me. "Good to meet you," he said, in the tone that meant the opposite. And then the conversation continued as though I hadn't arrived. Looking back, that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that Melissa hadn't looked at me once. An hour passed. I spent it moving through the apartment, talking to people who were actually interesting, catching up with Calvin for a few minutes, and slowly becoming aware of a feeling I didn't want to name. It wasn't jealousy. It was something quieter, more like recognition, like finally seeing a pattern you'd been staring at for months without identifying it. I found Melissa again near the fireplace. She was still with Reed. The group had thinned. It was mostly just the two of them now, and the conversation had the texture of something private being conducted in public. I stood a few feet away for a moment. She didn't see me, or she saw me and chose not to. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and thought about what it meant that the woman I shared an apartment with was across the room and further from me than the stranger she was currently laughing with. That's when I heard her. Not clearly, just a fragment, pulled from the noise of the party like a thread pulled from a coat. I want a man people notice immediately. She said it to Reed, lightly, conversationally, like it was an abstract preference she was sharing, like I wasn't 8 feet away, like I wasn't the man she came home to every night. I set my glass down. I looked at her across the room. She still wasn't looking at me. I thought about saying something. I thought about walking over, putting a hand on her shoulder, inserting myself back into her sight line the way you assert yourself when you feel invisible. I decided not to. I picked up my jacket. I found Calvin, thanked him for having us, told him Melissa would get home fine. He read my face in the way good friends do. Without asking questions he knew I wasn't ready to answer. Text me, he said. Yeah, I said. I walked out. The night air hit cold and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in my jacket pockets, listening to the city make its particular sounds. Then I started walking. She came home at 1:15 in the morning. I was awake. Not waiting, just awake. Reading something I wasn't really reading, the words moving past my eyes without landing. She set her purse on the counter, took off her heels, moved through the apartment with the particular quiet of someone who expected to have to explain themselves. You left early, she said. I did. You should have told me. I said goodnight to Calvin. She sat on the edge of the bed, her back to me, working the clasp of her earring. Reed was interesting, she said. Casually, like we were still at the party. I'm sure he was. She turned then. Something in my tone must have shifted. Are you upset? I looked at her. I heard what you said. A pause. Not long. Just long enough to mean she knew what I meant. I was just making conversation. I know, I said. It wasn't about you. I know that too, I said. And I meant it. Not the way someone says it when they're pretending to be fine. I meant it because the sentence she'd said wasn't about me. It was about what she saw when she looked at me. And what she saw was someone she'd stopped noticing. She turned back to the mirror. I went back to my book. Neither of us said anything else. That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how normal it felt. The next 3 weeks were quiet in the way that things go quiet before they shift. We moved through the apartment with the practiced ease of two people who had built a functional life together and were now maintaining it on autopilot. We ate dinner together most nights. We talked about small things. Her client presentations. My contract renewals. What to do about the drafty window in the bedroom. We did not talk about the party. I didn't bring it up. She didn't apologize. And I kept thinking about that silence the way you keep pressing a bruise, not to cause pain, but to understand where the edge of it is. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Quietly, out of her sight. 3 months before the party, a former client of mine, a woman named Danielle Park who ran a boutique M&A advisory firm, had reached out with an unusual proposal. Her firm was growing faster than its infrastructure could handle. She needed someone to come in at a senior level, build out their analytics and client services architecture, and help position them for a Series A adjacent valuation conversation. It wasn't a traditional hire. It was a partnership track. I'd been sitting on it for weeks, running models in my head, weighing what it would mean to merge my small firm into something with more velocity. The morning after the party, I called Danielle back. Still interested? She asked. Tell me the details, I said. We talked for 90 minutes. By the end of the call, I had a number in my head that I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. It was a number that would have surprised Melissa. It would have surprised a lot of people. At the time, I didn't fully understand why that mattered to me. Looking back, I do. You've been distracted, Melissa said one evening over dinner. Working on something. The usual clients? New direction, actually. She looked up from her plate. This was the moment I could have told her. About Danielle. About the offer. About the 6 months of rebuilding I'd done that had positioned me to take a swing like this. I didn't. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd ask. She didn't. She went back to her dinner. As long as it pays the bills, she said, with a smile that was meant to be light. It landed differently. I nodded. I didn't say anything else. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain exactly why. I dismissed it. Or tried to. I signed with Danielle in mid-January. Not an employment contract. A partnership agreement. I brought my existing client relationships. She brought the infrastructure, the brand, the runway. We built an equity structure that gave me a meaningful stake and a seat at the table. I told Melissa it was a new professional arrangement. I kept the equity details to myself. Not out of deception, I want to be clear about that. Out of a strange, quiet instinct that I didn't fully trust yet. The instinct said, wait. See who she is when she doesn't know. By February, the work had become consuming in the best way. Danielle ran a tight team. Hard, direct, fair. She had a talent for identifying exactly what a business was worth and making a room believe it. I found myself working longer hours, but it felt different than the kind of tired you accumulate doing something that's merely sustaining you. This felt like building. Real building. The kind where you can point to something at the end of the day and say, that didn't exist this morning. Melissa and I had settled into a rhythm that was comfortable and a little hollow. She noticed I was busier. She didn't ask what I was building. Calvin asked. When I told him, in general terms, about the partnership, he went quiet for a moment. That's a serious move, he said. I know. Does Melissa know? She knows I'm in a new arrangement. Another quiet moment. She asked about the details? No. He nodded slowly. All right, he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. In March, Melissa told me she'd been promoted. Senior Director of Integrated Campaigns. More responsibility, more visibility, a meaningful salary bump. I was genuinely happy for her. We went to dinner to celebrate. A nice place, not performative, just good. She was lit up all evening. Animated, warm, the version of herself I'd fallen for 3 years ago. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, she said something that sat with me. I just feel like things are starting to happen, she said. Like everything is finally clicking into place. She meant her career. She meant her world. But the way she said it, the particular energy of it, made it clear she wasn't talking about us. She was talking about herself. Which was fine. People grow. People evolve. But there was a version of that sentence that would have included me. That version wasn't said. I smiled. I ordered dessert. I thought about the number in my partnership agreement. I still didn't understand what I was doing. But I was doing it anyway. April was when things started moving faster. Danielle's firm, officially rebranded now as Harlow Advisory, had landed 2 major engagements that put us in rooms we hadn't been in before. Not celebrity rooms. Not social rooms. The kind of rooms where decisions about serious amounts of money get made quietly, by people who don't need anyone to know about it. I was flying to Boston once a week. Twice to Chicago. A brief and productive trip to London that I still think about as the moment I understood what we were actually building. I'd tell Melissa I was traveling for work. She'd nod and say, safe travels, and mean it, in the way you mean something that doesn't cost you anything. I should have felt lonely. I didn't exactly. I felt like I was becoming something. And becoming something, real becoming, not performed becoming, tends to be a solitary process. Tristan called me in late April. Calvin told me about your new venture, he said. Vaguely. He's loyal. I know. Is it going well? Better than expected. Good. A pause. How are things with Melissa? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Stable, I said finally. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Stable isn't great. No, I agreed. But it isn't nothing. You sound like a man who's made a decision he hasn't announced yet. I didn't answer. Okay, Tristan said. I'm here when you need me. He wasn't wrong. I had made a decision. I just hadn't accepted it yet. The conversation happened on a Sunday in early May. It wasn't a fight. It was something more honest than a fight and harder to recover from. We were both home, unusual for a Sunday lately, and the apartment had the heavy quiet of a space where 2 people are being very careful around each other. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop. She was reading something on the couch. Can I ask you something? She said. I looked up. Are you happy? I closed the laptop. I sat with the question for a moment. Are you? I asked. She looked at me. Not away. At me. Which felt like something, given recent history. I don't know, she said. That's honest. I've been thinking, she said, about what I want. Long term. And I think I want more than this. The word this landed softly and broke something. Define this, I said. She looked uncomfortable. I don't mean you specifically, but you mean us. She didn't argue. I just think, she said carefully, that I've changed. And maybe we've grown in different directions. I nodded slowly. Do you think, I said, That has anything to do with the kind of man you want people to notice? She went still. She remembered. She looked like she wanted to say something and couldn't find the shape of it. That was a throwaway comment, she said. I know, I said. Most revealing things are. We sat in the silence of two people who have finally said the real thing. I moved out 3 weeks later. Not dramatically. I found a furnished rental in Tribeca, temporary, clean mine. Tristan helped me think through the logistics. Calvin helped me move 2 boxes of books and a coffee maker, then took me to dinner and didn't make me talk about it. Melissa and I divided things quietly. No lawyers. No anger. Just 2 people acknowledging that the thing they'd built together had run its course. She kept the apartment. The lease was in her name anyway. I took the coffee maker, the books, and something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not happiness. Not yet. But the particular relief of having stopped carrying something that was never going to get lighter. Summer arrived the way it does in New York, suddenly, and with full commitment. I was working constantly. Harlow Advisory had crossed a threshold that Danielle and I had drawn on a whiteboard in December and quietly sworn not to discuss with anyone until we hit it. We hit it in June. I remember the exact moment she sent the message. We're there. I read it standing on the sidewalk outside a meeting in Lower Manhattan, the sun doing that late afternoon thing it does over the Hudson, and I stood very still for a moment. Then I kept walking. Because that's the thing about real progress. It doesn't announce itself. It just becomes the new floor. We began discussions with a group of institutional investors who had been watching us for 2 quarters. The conversations were structured, serious, and extremely confidential. Danielle ran the meetings. I built the models that made the numbers impossible to argue with. It was, I'm aware, exactly the kind of thing no one at Calvin's party would have predicted from the man Melissa had described as in consulting. I ran into Melissa once, in August. A coffee shop in the West Village. The kind of meeting the city arranges without asking your permission. She looked good. Professionally successful. Slightly tired around the eyes. The kind of tired that comes from running hard in a direction you've chosen. We were civil. Warm, even. How are you, she asked. Busy, I said. Good busy. I heard you changed firms. Something like that. She nodded. She looked like she wanted to ask something specific. She didn't. I didn't volunteer anything. We said goodbye in front of the coffee shop and went in different directions. I thought about her for about half a block. Then I thought about the investor call I had in 2 hours. September brought something unexpected. Calvin, who had somehow, quietly, been paying attention to everything I was building, called me one afternoon with a proposition. There's a gala, he said. The kind with a capital G, Annual Venture and Investment Showcase. Harlow's going to be recognized as an emerging firm this year. I hadn't known this. Danielle didn't tell me. I said. She's modest, Calvin said. The point is, you're being honored. There's an award. It's not the most important thing in the world, but it's the kind of room you want to be in. I thought about Calvin's party in November. I thought about a sentence floated casually near a fireplace. When is it? I asked. 3rd week of October. I'll be there. The gala was at a venue in the meatpacking district, the kind of space that had been converted so many times it had stopped remembering what it originally was. High ceilings. Exposed steel. Soft lighting doing architectural work. 400 people. The kind of 400 that doesn't need to announce its own importance. I wore a suit that I'd had made in London. Not because I needed to make an impression, because I'd earned the right to dress like someone who belongs in the room. Danielle and I arrived together with 2 colleagues from the firm. The moment we walked in, I noticed something. People looked. Not at me specifically. Not yet. But there was a register in the room. A shift. When the Harlow team entered that I hadn't experienced before. We were no longer the firm people were curious about. We were the firm people had already decided to pay attention to. It was quiet. Unmistakable. I was at the bar, 10 minutes in, talking to a founder I'd met at a Chicago conference, when Calvin appeared at my elbow. There's someone here you might want to know about, he said, in the tone he uses when he's being careful. I looked at him. Melissa's here, he said. She came with someone from her agency. They do some investor relations work. They were invited through a client. I looked across the room. She was there, standing near the entrance, wearing something deep red, scanning the room the way you scan a room when you're not quite sure what you're looking for. She hadn't seen me yet. You okay? Calvin asked. Completely, I said, and I meant it. The program began at 7:30. A welcome from the evening's hosts, followed by remarks from 2 investors whose names I recognized from conversations I now sat at the table for. Then the awards. Harlow Advisory was the third firm recognized. Danielle accepted the award. That was right. It was her house, and spoke briefly about what the firm stood for and where it was going. Then she said something I hadn't expected. There's a person without whom none of what I just described would exist. He rebuilt the analytical foundation of this firm, brought a client portfolio that tripled our institutional credibility, and has a perspective on value creation that I genuinely believe is rare. He doesn't like speeches about himself. So I'll just say, this belongs to him as much as it belongs to me. She looked at me. The room looked at me. 400 people. In the way that rooms turn when someone becomes the center of gravity. I stood. I nodded. Once, the way you accept something you've earned without performing gratitude. I was aware of the room in a specific way. I was aware, somewhere in the middle distance to my left, of Melissa. I didn't look at her. Not yet. After the program ended and the evening opened back into cocktail hour, I moved through the room the way you move through a room when you've stopped being invisible in it. People came to me. An investor I'd been trying to get 15 minutes with for 2 months introduced himself and suggested we find time before the end of the month. 2 founders who were pre-series A wanted to talk. A journalist from a financial publication asked if I was open to a profile. I said maybe. I shook hands. I talked. I stayed present. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I became aware of Melissa watching from across the room. Not scanning anymore. Watching. Specifically, me. She approached an hour into the evening. I saw her coming. I finished the sentence I was in the middle of, excused myself gracefully, and turned to face her. She looked. There's no clean word for it. She looked like someone recalibrating. Like a navigator who just realized the map they've been using has a significant error and they've arrived somewhere completely different from where they intended. I didn't know you'd be here, she said. I didn't know you would be either. Danielle's speech was, she stopped. Tried again. You built this. We built it, I said. It's her firm. I helped grow it. The numbers she mentioned in the program are accurate, I said. She looked at me with an expression that took me a moment to identify. I'd seen curiosity from her. I'd seen warmth. I'd seen disappointment and detachment and the practiced pleasantness of someone going through motions. I hadn't seen this. This was wonder. And underneath it, something harder to look at. The particular grief of realizing you had something and didn't understand what it was until it was gone. You never told me, she said. Her voice was quiet, not accusatory, honest. You never asked, I said. Not cruelly, just accurately. She absorbed that. We stood there for a moment, 2 people who had shared a life and were now standing in the wreckage of what they hadn't known to protect. I said something at Calvin's party, she said. You did. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I looked at her. Melissa, I said. I think you meant it exactly the way it sounded. I just don't think you knew I was in earshot. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they were a little bright. I was stupid, she said. You were honest, I said. That's not the same thing. She swallowed. Is there? She stopped. Are you? She couldn't find the right question because there were too many of them. I helped her. Well, I said. I'm good, actually. Really good. She nodded. She looked around the room, at the people who had spent the evening gravitating toward me, at the space I occupied now that was different from the space I'd occupied at her side at Calvin's party almost a year ago. I can see that, she said. Reed, I learned from Calvin later, had been at the party that night. He'd been invited through a mutual contact. He and Danielle had crossed paths professionally. He'd seen the award presentation. He'd seen the room turn. He'd asked Calvin afterward, "Who is that?" Calvin had told him. Reed had said, I think I've met him. Calvin said, he was at my party last November. He left early. Reed had apparently gone quiet after that. I don't know why that detail satisfies me the way it does, but it does. She called 2 days after the gala. I saw her name and let it ring. She left a voicemail. She said she'd been thinking. She said she'd been wrong about a lot of things. She said she missed me. She said she knew it was probably too late. She asked if we could talk. Her voice sounded like someone standing at a door they know might not open. I listened to it once. Then I put my phone in my jacket pocket and walked back into the meeting I'd stepped out of. The month after the gala, things accelerated in the way that real momentum does. Not in a straight line, but in a widening spiral. The institutional investment conversation moved from discussion to structure. Danielle and I had 3 weeks of meetings that I won't describe in detail, except to say they were the kind of weeks that remind you why you made the choices you made. I moved out of the Tribeca rental and bought something. Not huge. Not a statement. A clean, Well-lit apartment in the West Village with high ceilings and a view of the street below and enough space to think. Mine. Fully, legally mine. I stood in the middle of it the first night after I got the keys, with nothing in it yet except a coffee maker on the kitchen counter, and I thought about the version of myself standing on the sidewalk outside Calvin's party in November, hands in jacket pockets, listening to the city. That version had felt diminished, small, invisible to the one person who was supposed to see him. This version, standing in his own space, in his own life, with something real built behind him and more being built in front, didn't feel small. He felt, for the first time in a long time, exactly the right size. Wyatt, a friend from my pre-Melissa days who'd been living in Seattle and recently moved back, took me to dinner to celebrate the apartment. He'd known me long enough to remember who I was before I'd gotten quieter. "You seem different," he said, over drinks. "I'm the same." "No." He shook his head. "You're more yourself." "Does that make sense?" It did. "I stopped waiting," I said. "For what?" I thought about it. "To be seen," I said finally. I stopped building for the audience that wasn't watching. Started building for the thing itself. Wyatt nodded like that meant something. "And now the audience showed up," he said. I smiled. "Some of them." She tried twice more. One text, 3 weeks after the voicemail. Short. Careful. She said she understood if I didn't want to respond, but she wanted me to know she was genuinely proud of what I'd built. I appreciated that. I didn't reply. One more call, 6 weeks after that. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message this time. I don't know if that means she'd accepted it or if it means she hadn't found the words. Either way, I didn't have an answer to give her. There's a thing that happens when you build something real. Not the thing people talk about, the success, the recognition, the moment when the room turns and suddenly you exist. Something quieter than that. A reckoning. You look back at the version of yourself who was dismissed, who was invisible, who was standing 8 feet from someone saying, "I want a man people notice immediately." And you feel something complicated about him. Not pity, not anger. Something more like gratitude. Because he didn't collapse. He didn't argue. He didn't perform visibility for an audience that had already decided not to watch. He just walked out into the cold and started building in the dark, where no one could see, and where, because of that, no one could interfere. Danielle asked me once, in a late Friday evening conversation that had wandered past the professional into something more like friendship, whether I had any regrets about the way the year had gone. I thought about Melissa. I thought about the party. I thought about the version of that relationship that might have existed, the one where I told her about Danielle's offer the morning after the party, where she heard the number and shifted, where we built something together. No, I said. Really. The things that ended were finished before they ended. I was just the last to read it. Danielle nodded slowly. "That's either very wise or a good rationalization," she said. "Probably both," I admitted. She laughed, and we went back to work. Calvin's next party was in March. Different apartment, he'd upgraded. Same energy. Good people. I arrived on time for once. I knew almost everyone in the room. More accurately, almost everyone in the room knew me. It wasn't something I performed. It wasn't something I announced. It simply was. I stood near the windows with a drink in my hand, talking to an architect who was describing a building she was working on in Dumbo, and I felt something I want to be precise about. Not triumph. Not vindication. Something more quiet than that. I felt like someone who had become, without announcing it, exactly the person he was always going to become. The room knew it. I knew it. And somewhere out in the city, in an apartment that used to be partly mine, a woman knew it too. Differently than the rest of us. More specifically, in the way you know something that cost you something to learn. Tristan found me near the end of the evening. "You look different," he said. "People keep saying that. It's not a bad thing." He sipped his drink. "Whatever you did this year, it's on you. You know that, right? Not the firm, not the investors, not the circumstances." I looked at him. "You walked out of a room," he said. "And instead of spending the next 12 months figuring out how to walk back in, you went and built a better one." I thought about that. "That's a generous read," I said. "It's an accurate one," he said. He raised his glass. I raised mine. We didn't say anything else. She never called again after that last unanswered attempt. Maybe she moved on. Maybe she found what she was looking for, a man people notice immediately, the kind who enters a room already turned toward him. Maybe she found out that being noticed is a different thing than being seen. I hope she's well. I mean that without bitterness, which is how I know I've actually moved past it. I think about that night sometimes. The party. The sentence. The cold sidewalk. I don't think about it with pain anymore. I think about it the way you think about a door you almost didn't walk through, or a sentence you almost let break you, instead of build you. Some nights, standing at the window of the apartment in the West Village, I look down at the street below. People moving, the city doing what it does, the light working through the trees the way it does on quiet evenings in fall. And I think about the man who stood on the sidewalk in November with his hands in his jacket pockets. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know what he was about to build. He just knew something was over, and that something could begin. That was enough. It turned out to be exactly enough.